Have you ever heard the saying, a text without a context is a pretext for a proof text? Let me give you an example. What would you say if a new Christian in your church came up to you crying and said she just realizes that she can't be saved because she doesn't have kids and she's not very holy? You would probably take her to the book of Ephesians and explain to her that salvation is by grace through faith and it's a gift from God. But then what if she read you this passage? 1 Timothy 2:15, but women will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with propriety. Wow. Would you say, well, that settles it, unless you get to having kids and get your holiness on point, you're not going to heaven? Of course not, because we know that there are a lot of Bible verses that clearly explain salvation, and that happens to be a difficult verse. The truth is, just about any scripture taken out of context can support any belief. In fact, if you're ever talking to Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses, they will take you to the Bible and use verses to confirm their understanding. Sometimes when I'm bored, I'll watch theological debates for fun, and it's absolutely amazing how each side chooses certain verses that really looks like it supports their point. And this happens all the time with the rapture discussion, but there's two particular verses that come up all the time. The exchange typically looks something like this. The pre-trib side will say, Revelation 3:10, because you have kept my word about patient endurance, I will keep you from the hour of trial that's coming on the whole world to try those who dwell on the earth. Then the other side will come back and say, well, Revelation 2:10, which was also written to the 7 churches and is also to a faithful church, says, do not fear what you're about to suffer. Look, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison to test you, and you will suffer tribulation for 10 days. Be faithful even unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. Then the other side will quote Jesus in the Gospels in Luke 21:36, saying, be always on the watch and pray that you may be able to escape all that is about to happen and that you may be able to stand before the Son of Man. And then the other side will quote John 17:15, I'm not asking you to take them out of the world, but to keep them safe from the evil one. So how do we figure out who is right? Here's some tips. Whenever you get one Bible verse, you actually want to read the entire chapter that the verse is from, then you want to read the chapter before it and the chapter after it. Later on, when you get more time, you actually want to read that whole book of the Bible. If you happen to come across a verse that's really difficult to understand, like the women will be saved in childbearing, the general advice is to not build an entire doctrine and theology off of that one verse, especially if the interpretation seems to be contrary to the rest of Scripture. 2 Peter 3:16 warns us about this. Discussing Paul's letter, he says, letters contain some things that are hard to understand, which ignorant and unstable people distort as they do the other scriptures to their own destruction. We just want to be careful not to cherry pick verses and proof texts without looking at the larger picture of what scripture is clearly saying. This process is actually how I ended up changing my mind about a pre-tribulation rapture. I went to one of the most famous pre-trib churches actually in the world, Pastor John Hagee of Cornerstone, and I had been taught all of the theology and doctrines. I knew the 4 or 5 texts that supposedly supported the pre-trib view, but one day I actually looked at those verses very carefully and realized that they did not say what I had been taught that they said. Once I read the entire book of Revelation, there was no more question for me. So I think that it's important that we're all super honest with ourselves. Have we read the entire book of Revelation? Have we read all of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians? Of course, there's room for different interpretations, but the key is really making sure we're not just believing what somebody else told us and repeating the verses that they gave us. God bless you guys.